The first thing Vanessa Holt noticed was the hose hanging off the side like a dead snake, not the man standing beside it, not the little girl holding an old blue racing cap in both hands. Not the way the man's eyes moved across the dents, the brackets, the faded red paint, and the right side compartment, as if he was reading a language everyone else had forgotten. Just the hose. Then the CEO of Holt Premier Auto Group laughed loud enough for the whole clearance yard to hear. "You paid $600 for that," she said, pointing at the rusted 1974 Ford C750 fire truck. "Ethan, that is not a vehicle. That is a warning sign." A few employees turned. One of the younger detailers pulled out his phone. The truck sat under the white afternoon glare behind the service buildings. Its paint burned dull by years of sun, its white roof yellowed with age, its hose reel cracked, its rear step dented, one side mirror missing. It had come through a small salvage auction, attached to the property cleanup Vanessa had ordered before converting the old service yard into a luxury showroom expansion. The auctioneer had called it a retired rural pumper. The paperwork called it surplus. Vanessa called it trash. Ethan Cole, 38 years old, single father, mechanic, and the only person there who had actually looked twice, said nothing. His daughter Lily stood near his hip, 8 years old, quiet in a faded denim jacket, her fingers curled around the old blue racing cap that had belonged to her grandfather Daniel. She had been picked up from school 20 minutes earlier because Ethan could not afford aftercare that week. And now she stood in a yard full of adults, pretending the joke was harmless. Vanessa stepped closer to the truck and tapped one polished heel against the cracked hose coupling. "Only a broke single dad would call this an investment," she said. "What were you planning to do, Ethan? Park it beside your rental and wait for someone to mistake you for a museum." The men behind her smiled because she was the one who signed checks. Someone laughed because silence would have looked dangerous. Lily looked up at her father and asked in a voice small enough to break him, "Dad, did Grandpa work on trash too?" Ethan's hand settled gently on her shoulder. His face did not change. He did not look at Vanessa. He looked at the truck's passenger side step, where a flake of red paint had lifted near a small aluminum tag almost buried under old overspray and dirt. Most people would have missed it. Ethan did not. He crouched, rubbed the dust with his thumb, and saw 3 letters and 2 numbers appear like a message from the past. SAR 12. Vanessa saw him kneel and mistook patience for embarrassment. "Please don't start praying to it," she said. "I need this thing gone before the investor walkthrough Friday." Ethan brushed once more. Under the first line, smaller letters appeared. Slur. Under that, 1978. His fingers stopped. The whole yard was still loud, still cruel, still full of people who thought the story had already been decided. But Ethan's mind had moved somewhere else. He saw an old photograph in his father's toolbox. A red service truck, behind a row of race cars. A younger Daniel Cole standing in a greasy jacket beside a side compartment that looked too square. Too reinforced, too strange for a county fire department. 1 week later, a racing museum curator would stand in front of that same rusted fire truck and read hidden crew records that had been missing for more than 40 years. People who had laughed at the broken hose would stare at the logbook inside the compartment and realize the truck had never been just a truck. But in that first moment, with his daughter watching and his boss calling him foolish, Ethan only stood up, wiped his thumb on his work pants, and said, "I bought it fair." Vanessa smiled thinly then. "Fair warning," she said. "Move your $600 mistake before it costs you more than $600. Before we go further, if stories about quiet fathers, forgotten machines, and people who see value where others see junk mean something to you, stay with Ethan and Lily today. And wherever you are listening from, leave your city or country in the comments. Some stories travel farther than the people inside them ever could." Ethan signed the bill of sale at a folding table beside the auction trailer. Nora Finch, the office clerk who handled Holt's disposal paperwork, stamped the receipt and slid it across with a look that said she wished the yard had fewer ears. "600 even," she said softly. "Surplus lot number 17. Title release attached. Keep this copy safe." Ethan folded it once, then twice, and put it in the inner pocket of his jacket, not his tool bag. He had learned the hard way that paper could protect a working man when words could not. Lily watched the old truck, like it might wake up and defend itself. Vanessa had already walked away with 2 assistants, but her voice carried back across the lot. "Make sure that thing does leak oil on my pavement," she called. "The whole point of clearing this yard is to stop looking poor." Ethan helped Lily climb into his old pickup, then returned to the fire truck with a portable battery pack and a flashlight. He was not trying to start it in front of them. He was not trying to prove a miracle. He only wanted to know what kind of machine he had bought. The Ford's hood groaned when he lifted it. Dust and leaves sat in the corners. The old V8 looked tired, not destroyed. Belts were dry. Wires had been patched badly. The fuel smell was stale, but not hopeless. He checked the battery leads, the oil color, the brake lines he could see without crawling under too far. Then he moved to the right side compartment. Fire trucks had compartments, of course, but this one was wrong in small ways that mattered. The latch had been replaced with a heavier one. The hinge screws were not county issue. There were old holes in 2 rows where something like map clips or route boards had been mounted. A narrow bracket near the top had been cut off instead of removed cleanly. Ethan touched the marks with the same care other men used for signatures. He did not know the whole answer yet, but he knew the question was bigger than a broken hose. That night, the truck sat behind the small rental house. Ethan kept at the edge of an industrial lane, squeezed between a tire shop and a closed cabinet warehouse. He had paid a tow driver cash to drag it there before Vanessa changed her mind about allowing it off the lot. Lily ate macaroni at the kitchen table with her homework open and her grandfather's cap beside her pencil case. Through the window, the red fire truck looked enormous in the fading light, too big for the cracked driveway, too bright even under rust. "Is Miss Holt going to fire you?" Lily asked. Ethan rinsed one plate and turned off the water. "Not tonight," he said. "Tonight she's going to think she already won." Lily frowned at the truck. "Why did you buy it?" Ethan looked at the cap on the table. Daniel Cole had worn it in garages, pit lanes, and gas station parking lots for so many years that the blue had gone soft and gray at the edges. "Because your grandpa used to say old machines keep receipts," Ethan said. "Not paper receipts, marks, scratches, things people forgot to hide." Lily considered that the way children consider adult sadness, carefully but without all the words. Then she took a sheet of notebook paper, wrote in purple marker, "Dad S. Not Trash Truck," and taped it to the inside of the kitchen window facing the driveway, after Lily went to bed. Ethan carried a work light outside. He did not have a proper garage. He had a carport roof that rattled in wind, 2 tool chests, and a tarp patched with duct tape. He set the light near the passenger step and cleaned around the aluminum tag with a soft brush. The full marking came through slowly. 12 supports or 1978. Ethan leaned back on his heels. LR could mean 100 things in the wrong hands, but in his father's old stories it meant one thing before anything else: Silverline Racing. Not the famous factory teams that rich collectors bragged about, but a small, stubborn outfit that had run endurance and regional events in the late 70s, always underfunded, always moving, always one breakdown away from disappearing. He went inside and opened the bottom drawer of the hallway cabinet, where Mara had once kept winter scarves and where he now kept the pieces of family history too fragile for the garage. Mara had been gone 5 years, and still Ethan sometimes reached into that drawer as if he were asking permission from the past. He pulled out Daniel's metal photo box and sat at the kitchen table under the weak yellow light. There were pictures of garages, men in dirty jackets, race cars with hand-painted numbers, and one photograph Ethan had not studied in years. Daniel stood beside a red truck with a white roof, one hand on an open side compartment, a pit badge hanging from his neck. The truck in the photo had no visible fire department lettering, but the shape of the compartment was the same. The next morning, Ethan arrived at Holt Premier before sunrise, changed into his gray work shirt, and did his job like a man who could not afford pride. He diagnosed a transmission complaint on a customer SUV, replaced a cracked vacuum line another tech had missed, and kept his head down when the video from the auction yard started circulating among the employees. By 10 o'clock, 2 detailers had already called him fire chief under their breath. By noon, someone had taped a print picture of a burning dumpster to his locker. Ethan took it down, folded it without looking around, and threw it away. If Lily had not seen the first insult, it might have hurt less, but she had, and that made every laugh feel like it had crossed a line into his home. At lunch, Nora found him behind the parts room with a paper cup of coffee he had not touched. "You need to keep your copy of the sale," she said. Ethan looked up. Nora was in her 50s, with reading glasses on a chain and the tired steadiness of someone who had survived too many managers. "I did," he said. She lowered her voice. "Vanessa asked me this morning whether surplus lot 17 had been processed correctly. Then she asked who authorized employee bidding." Ethan's eyes narrowed slightly. "Was it processed correctly?" Nora gave him a look. "I stamped it myself. She ordered the clearance open to staff because she wanted the lots gone fast." "You bought it legally." She paused. But legal does not always stop powerful people from being annoying. By 3:00, Vanessa made it official. She called Ethan into the glass conference room that overlooked the service floor. Not because she needed privacy, but because she liked being seen behind glass. Her beige coat hung over a chair. Her tablet was open. "Your fire truck is creating a brand problem," she said. Ethan stood with his hands at his sides. "It's at my house. It was purchased from a Holt-managed clearance," she said, "and I am reviewing whether that sale violated internal disposal policy." Ethan said, "Nora has the paperwork." Vanessa smiled without warmth. "Nora has whatever I tell her to find." That was the first moment Ethan understood. She had moved from mockery into pressure. She slid a printed notice across the table. "You have 48 hours to remove any visible Holt lot markings, confirm off-site storage, and stop discussing the vehicle with employees or outside parties. If the asset is determined to have been improperly released, we will reclaim it." Ethan read the words slowly. It was dressed like policy, but it smelled like a threat. "You called it trash yesterday," he said. "Now it's an asset?" Vanessa leaned back. "Yesterday it embarrassed you. Today it embarrasses me. Different problem." She tapped the table once. "Do not confuse a lucky receipt with ownership if my attorneys decide to look closer." Ethan returned to the service bay and finished his shift without telling anyone what was sitting in his jacket pocket. At home, Lily waited on the front step with her backpack still on. "The truck is still here," she said, relieved. Ethan looked at the red shape in the driveway. For the first time all day, he smiled a little. "It is." They ate grilled cheese sandwiches because payday was 2 days away. After dinner, Lily sat on an overturned bucket under the carport while Ethan worked at the compartment latch. He gave her safety glasses that were too big for her face and told her she was in charge of holding the flashlight steady. The old latch resisted, swollen with rust and paint, but Ethan did not force it. "Why not just pull hard?" Lily asked. "Because if something old has been closed for 40 years, he said. "You ask before you open it." He worked oil into the hinge, tapped the latch, listened to the sound, adjusted pressure, and tried again. The door shifted half an inch with a dry scrape. Dust fell from the seam. Ethan stopped immediately. Inside the narrow opening, something brown and flat pressed against the compartment wall. Not a hose, not a nozzle. Paper. He used 2 fingers and a trim tool to ease it free, moving slowly enough that Lily stopped swinging her feet. The first thing that came out was a stiff card with a faded red stripe and a hole punched at the top. Ethan turned it under the light. It was a pit crew badge. The name line had blurred, but the bottom was clear. "Silverline Racing Support." Lily whispered, "Is that Grandpa S?" Ethan did not answer quickly, because hope was dangerous when a child was holding it. He set the badge on a clean towel and reached into the compartment again. This time, he pulled out a folded fuel sheet, brittle at the edges, with handwritten columns and initials beside each stop. Then came the corner of a logbook, black cover gray with dust, the pages swollen but intact. Ethan did not open it all the way. He placed it on the towel as if it were alive. The first visible page read, "Support Route August 1978 SAR 12. Under that, in handwriting that made his chest tighten, were crew initials, driver notes, tire counts, fuel stops, and a line that said, "D. Coal rear compartment inventory confirmed." The carport seemed to shrink around him. Ethan saw his father's hands in memory, black with grease, guiding his own smaller fingers around a wrench. He saw Daniel coming home late, smelling of oil and road dust, telling stories Mara used to say sounded too sad to be bragging. He had heard the name Silverline Racing as a boy, but never like this, never written in a hidden logbook inside a truck everyone else had laughed at. Lily leaned closer. "D. Cole," she read. "That S. Grandpa Daniel." Ethan nodded once. His throat felt tight. "Maybe," he said. "We have to prove it before we believe it out loud the next morning." Proof became harder to protect. A tow truck from Holt's contracted yard rolled slowly into the lane before Ethan had even left for work. Grant Morrow, head of security, stepped out with a clipboard and the uncomfortable face of a man following orders he did not want to explain. Ethan met him in the driveway. Lily watched from the window, the blue cap pressed against the glass. "Morning, Ethan," Grant said. "Vanessa sent me to confirm location and condition." Ethan looked past him at the tow rig. "That looks like more than confirmation." Grant sighed. "She says there may be a title issue." Ethan took the folded bill of sale from his jacket and held it out. "There is T. Grant read it, then read it again." His expression changed by a degree. "Nora stamped this?" "Yes." "You got the release too?" Ethan handed him the second paper. Grant lowered his clipboard. "I am not hooking it today," he said quietly. "But she's not going to like that," Ethan said. "She does have to like my property." Grant glanced at the fire truck and then at the open compartment under the tarp. "For what it's worth, I thought it was junk too." Ethan looked at the truck. Most people did. From the window, Lily gave a small thumbs up. Ethan returned it without smiling too big. At Holt Premier, Vanessa's mood had sharpened by mid-morning. She walked through the service bay with two managers and stopped beside Ethan's lift. "I hear you refused a company inspection," she said. Ethan kept his voice level. Grant inspected the paperwork. "Grant is security, not legal. Then legal can read the same receipt." The bay quieted, not completely, but enough for tools to sound louder. Vanessa looked around and seemed to enjoy the audience. "Let me be very clear," she said. "If you keep turning this into a sideshow, you will not do it as an employee of my company. You are a mechanic here, Ethan, not an archaeologist, not a historian, not some hidden genius in a movie." A few people smiled again, but less confidently this time. Ethan reached into his lunch bag, took out a sealed plastic sleeve, and removed a photocopy of the first fuel sheet. He had not planned to show it, but Vanessa had made the room public, and public disrespect sometimes required public proof. "I found this inside the compartment," he said. Vanessa barely looked. "Old paper." Ethan pointed to the top line. "Silver Line Racing Support Route, August 1978. Across the bay, an older mechanic named Roy Vance turned his head. Ethan continued, "The truck has an SIR 12 support tag under the paint. That is not fire department equipment." Vanessa rolled her eyes. "You found a sticker and a grocery list." Roy stepped closer before he seemed to realize he was doing it. "Silver Line," he said. Ethan looked at him. "You know the name?" Roy wiped his hands on a rag, suddenly careful. "My brother had posters. They ran out of a converted support truck for a while. People used to joke they were hiding a race team in a firehouse. The service bay changed. Not dramatically. No music swelled. No one gasped. But the smiles went away." Vanessa looked at Roy, annoyed that an employee had moved without permission. Ethan turned the page slightly so the light hit the handwritten line. "D. Cole, rear compartment inventory confirmed." Roy read it, then looked at Ethan with a different face. For the first time since the auction, the room went silent. Vanessa broke it because silence did not serve her. "Enough," she said. "Everyone back to work." She looked at Ethan with a controlled fury that was worse than her laughter. "My office. End of shift." Then she walked away, but the power she had brought into the bay did not leave with her. It had changed shape. Ethan could feel it in the way people avoided his eyes, not because he was still the joke, but because they were no longer sure what they had been laughing at. Roy stayed behind just long enough to say, "If that is what I think it is, don't let her tow it." Ethan folded the copy back into the sleeve. "I am trying not to at lunch." Nora found him again, this time in the records hallway. She did not waste words. "I scanned the sale file," she said. Ethan looked at her. "Why?" "Because when rich people ask me to misplace things, I like to remember where they were." She handed him a small envelope. Inside were printed copies of the bill of sale, the title release, the surplus authorization, and the employee bidding notice Vanessa herself had approved. "Do not keep the only copy at home," Nora said. "Do not keep the only copy in your truck, and do not assume she will stop because she was wrong in public." Ethan held the envelope like it weighed more than paper. "Thank you." Nora adjusted her glasses. "Thank me by being smarter than angry." That evening, Ethan opened the logbook only as far as the binding allowed. He photographed the cover. The first page, the badge, the fuel sheet, the SAR 12 tag, and the old picture of Daniel from the metal photo box. He laid everything out on a clean towel under the carport, while Lily sat beside him with her knees pulled to her chest. "Are we rich now?" she asked. Ethan almost laughed, but the question was too innocent for that. "No," he said. "We re careful now." He explained that old records had to be protected, that touching paper too much could damage it, That being right did not matter if they ruined the proof. Lily listened seriously. "So the truck is like a witness?" she asked. Ethan looked at the rusted, red side panel. The broken hose, the compartment that had waited decades to open. "Yes," he said, "exactly like a witness." He searched online for Silverline Racing archives, then for regional racing museums, then for names connected to lost support records. One name appeared in a forum post, then in a museum article, then in a lecture transcript. Dr. Martin Rise, curator at Great Plains Racing Museum. Ethan drafted an email 3 times before sending it. He did not write like a man trying to sell a fantasy. He wrote like a mechanic documenting a machine. He included the truck identity, the S12 marking, the first logbook page, the badge, the fuel sheet, and one careful sentence. "My late father, Daniel Cole, may be listed in these records, but I am looking for authentication before making any claim." Lily had fallen asleep on the old couch by the time Ethan pressed send. The house was quiet except for the refrigerator hum and the distant sound of trucks on the highway. Ethan stood at the kitchen window, looking at the fire truck under the carport light. The paper sign Lily had made still faced outward. "Dad's not trash truck." He thought about Vanessa's voice, the phone's recording. The way Lilia's question had cut deeper than any insult. Then he thought about his father, who had died with more stories than proof, and wondered how many quiet men disappeared because no one saved the records. The reply did not come as an email. It came as a phone call at 11:42 p.m. from a number Ethan did not recognize. He almost ignored it, then saw the area code from Kansas and stepped outside before answering. "This is Ethan Cole." The voice on the other end was older, controlled, and awake in the way only urgent people sound awake. "Mr. Cole, this is Dr. Martin Rise from Great Plains Racing Museum. I received your photographs." Ethan looked at the dark outline of the fire truck. "I'm sorry if it's too late." "No," Rise said. "It may be 40 years late, but not tonight." Ethan gripped the phone tighter. Dr. Rees continued, each word careful. "Do not clean the documents further. Do not separate pages. Do not allow anyone to tow, move, pressure wash, repaint, or inventory that vehicle without a conservation witness. The markings you sent match a missing Silverline Racing Support designation we have been trying to confirm for more than 2 decades. Ethan closed his eyes for half a second. Inside the house, Lily slept under a blanket with her grandfather's cap beside her. Outside, the truck that had been called trash sat under a cheap work light, still rusted, still ugly, still carrying something no one had bothered to respect. Then Dr. Rise said the sentence that changed the whole story. "Mr. Cole, whatever happens tomorrow, do not let anyone move that truck." Ethan did not sleep much after Dr. Rise called. He sat at the kitchen table with his phone face up, the printed documents from Nora in one stack, the photographs of the fire truck in another, and Lily's purple sign still visible through the window. The old red 1974 Ford C750 sat under the carport light like something caught between 2 lives. By sunrise, it was still ugly. The hose reel was still cracked, the paint still faded, and rust still chewed at the wheel arches. But Ethan no longer saw a retired rural pumper waiting to be hauled away. He saw a witness that changed the way he moved around it. He did not scrub it. He did not polish it. He put clean sheets under the open compartment, covered the logbook with acid-free paper he bought from an art store when it opened, and took wide photographs before touching anything else. Dr. Rise called again at 8:15, while Lily was eating toast in her school uniform with the old blue racing cap beside her cereal bowl. "I can be there tomorrow afternoon," he said. "But Mr. Cole, before I step onto your property, I want everything in writing. Ownership acknowledgement, inspection permission, no removal. No cleaning, no transfer, and no Holt representative handling the documents without you present." Ethan looked toward the driveway. "You think she'll try?" Rise was quiet for a second. When a person with power laughs at something worthless, they walk away. When they suddenly want rules, it usually means they have started to smell value. Ethan wrote the words down. Not because he needed them, but because careful men survived by making careful records. By noon, Vanessa had stopped laughing completely. She called Ethan into her office, this time with the blinds half closed and no audience behind the glass. On her desk sat a folder labeled Surplus Review, though Ethan could see the pages inside were freshly printed. "I may have been too harsh," she said, the smile on her face polished smooth. "This fire truck situation has become a distraction, and I am prepared to solve it generously." Ethan did not sit. Vanessa opened a checkbook and wrote while she spoke, $2,000. More than triple what you paid. You sign a simple release, Holt takes the vehicle back, and we both avoid embarrassment. Ethan looked at the check, then at her. Yesterday it was trash. Vanessa clicked the pen closed. Today it is a business risk. Ethan slid the check back without touching the ink. No, Vanessa's expression cooled. Be careful. Mechanics with side projects sometimes forget licensing boundaries. Storage violations, environmental complaints, unapproved repair activity at residential properties. A city inspector could make your life unpleasant. Ethan felt the old fear move under his ribs. The kind that came with rent due and a child depending on the roof. But fear was not the same as permission. The truck is covered. No fluids are leaking. I have the bill of sale. Title release and photographs from the moment it arrived. Vanessa stood. You think paper makes you untouchable? Ethan answered softly. No, I think paper makes you readable that evening. The first museum email arrived with attachments. Dr. Rye sent a preliminary access agreement, a conservation checklist, and a letter stating that Great Plains Racing Museum had reason to inspect a possible Silver Line Racing Support Vehicle designation. Ethan printed 3 copies at the library because his home printer had been out of ink for 2 months. Nora met him in the parking lot after work, still wearing her office badge, and handed him one more envelope. She asked me again for the original sale file, Nora said. This time she used the word misfiled. Ethan stared at the envelope. Why are you helping me? Nora looked tired, but not unsure, because I have watched men like you fix things for people who never learn your name. And because your daughter was standing there when she said it. Inside the envelope was the complete surplus chain, Vanessa's own approval to clear the yard, the staff bidding authorization, the lot number sheet, Ethan S600 receipt, and the title release. Nora had also included a screenshot from the company system showing the sale marked final before Vanessa began her review. Do not show her the original scans unless you have witnesses, Nora said. And Ethan, if this goes public, she will try to make you look unstable before she admits she was wrong. Ethan nodded. Then I'll be boring, he said. Nora almost smiled. Boring wins in court. When Ethan got home, Lily asked if Miss Nora was a secret agent. Ethan taped 1 copy of the papers inside a kitchen cabinet and said, no, she is something better. She pays attention. Dr. Rise arrived the next afternoon in a plain blue sedan, not a dramatic museum van. He was 62, thin, with silver hair, soft gloves, and the kind of eyes that made old objects feel less abandoned. He stood in front of the truck for a long moment before speaking. Lily watched from the porch with her cap pulled low. Well, Rise said, it is certainly not pretty. Ethan braced for the old insult. But Rise smiled gently. That may help us. Pretty things get repainted. Ugly things sometimes keep the truth. He photographed the ERS-12 tag, the side compartment, the hinge replacements, the cut brackets, the rows of holes where root clips had been, and the faded rectangle on the inside wall where a board had once protected paper from weather. Ethan expected questions, but Dr. Rise mostly asked him not to hurry. Together, they opened the compartment wider by ½ an inch, just enough to see the lower shelf. There were more badges, 3 folded route maps, a cloth pouch with tire pressure notes, and a Polaroid stuck to the back wall by old grime. Ethan eased it loose with a plastic tool while Rise held the light. The image came free slowly, and when Ethan turned it over, Lily made a tiny sound from the porch. Daniel Cole stood beside the same red truck in the photograph, younger than Ethan had ever known him, one hand raised as if someone had called his name. Around his neck hung the same style of pit badge. Behind him, partly visible, was hand-painted lettering, Silverline Support. For a while, nobody spoke. It was not the loud silence of a crowd. It was the private kind, the kind that enters a family and sits down. Ethan held the photograph with both hands. He had wanted proof. But he had not prepared for the feeling of seeing his father pulled out of a compartment like a missing page of his own life. Lily came down the steps slowly. That's Grandpa, she said. Ethan swallowed. Yes, Dr. Rise removed his glasses and cleaned them, though. They were not dirty, Mr. Cole, he said. I cannot give final authentication in your driveway, but I can tell you this. These records appear to belong to the missing Silverline Support archive. If complete, they may resolve several disputed entries in our exhibit. The news reached Vanessa faster than Ethan expected, because power had ears. By morning, she had scheduled what she called a Heritage Partnership preview for Friday at Holt Premier's Showroom Annex. the same event she had originally planned for investor Caleb Ward and a group of collectors. She sent Ethan a formal notice claiming that any object connected to Holt's clearance program should be reviewed on company property before public discussion. Ethan almost deleted it. Then Dr. Rise called. "Do not attend without terms," he said. "If the truck moves, it moves under your authority. If the documents appear, they appear under your control. And if Holt wants a public review, let them put their acknowledgement in writing." So Ethan became boring. Exactly as he had promised Nora, he replied with conditions. Holt must acknowledge his ownership in writing. The truck could not be moved without his consent. The documents would travel separately in museum sleeves. Dr. Reyes would act as conservation witness. Nora would verify the sale file. Ethan would be paid as a documentation consultant if Holt used his vehicle or records in any event, and no Holt employee would handle the logbook without permission. Vanessa fought the terms for 6 hours. Then Caleb Ward's office asked whether the preview would still include the newly discovered Silverline material. By sunset, Vanessa signed. The woman who had called it trash now needed the trash to impress a buyer. Friday came bright and cold. The old red Ford C750 did not roll into Holt Premier like a restored showpiece. It arrived on a flatbed with its rust visible, its hose still broken, and its side compartment secured with conservation tape. Ethan rode behind it in his pickup with Lily beside him and the documents in a sealed archival box on her lap. "Why didn't you fix the hose?" Lily asked. Ethan glanced at the truck ahead. "Because that is not what they were paying attention to." She frowned. "Then, what are they looking at?" Ethan said. "Whether they are brave enough to admit they looked wrong the first time." Inside the showroom annex, Vanessa had done what money always does when it gets nervous. She had added lights, banners, coffee, security, and a row of chairs for collectors and board members. She wore a black suit now, not the beige coat from the yard, and she spoke to Caleb Ward with a controlled brightness that never reached her eyes. When Ethan walked in wearing his clean gray work shirt and old boots, several employees turned. Some had recorded him a week earlier, some had laughed. Roy Vance stood near the service entrance, arms folded, watching like a man who had decided where the truth was likely to land. Nora sat at the document table with 3 folders and no expression at all. Vanessa opened the preview as if she had arranged the discovery herself. "Holt Premier has always believed in preserving automotive heritage," she said, standing beside the fire truck she had once called a warning sign. Ethan looked at Lily but said nothing. Dr. Rise did not interrupt. He simply waited until Vanessa finished praising the company's commitment to history, then stepped forward with the first photograph. "For clarity," he said, "this inspection concerns a privately owned 1974 Ford C750 fire truck purchased by Mr. Ethan Cole for $600 through a final surplus sale. The potential significance was identified by Mr. Cole after he observed non-standard compartment modifications and the SAR-12 support tag." The room shifted. Vanessa's jaw tightened. Caleb Ward looked from Rise to Ethan with new interest. Dr. Rise continued with calm precision. He showed the tag, the bracket pattern, the root clip marks, the badge hooks, and the interior shelf protected from moisture. He kept the technical details short, but every image made the same point. This truck had carried more than hoses. Ethan spoke only when asked, explaining how the latch had been opened, how the documents had been left in sequence, and why he had stopped handling them once the first page appeared. He did not restore it. Rise said to the room he recognized it. That distinction matters. Vanessa tried to recover control. "Of course, recognition is one step," she said. "Ownership and authenticity are separate legal questions." That was when her attorney stepped forward with a thin folder and announced that Holt reserved the right to review whether the truck had been mistakenly released as surplus. The words sounded official until Nora stood up. She did not raise her voice. She did not dramatize the moment. She simply opened her folder and placed 4 documents under the display camera: the staff bidding authorization, the lot sheet, the stamped 600 receipt, and Vanessa's own clearance approval. The screen behind them showed every signature clearly. The sale was final before any claim of error. Nora said, "I processed it. I scanned it. I am willing to state that on record." The first silence had happened in a service bay. This one was larger. It spread across collectors, employees, board members, and the man Vanessa had hoped to impress. Caleb Ward slowly turned his head toward her. Vanessa looked at Nora as if betrayal were the same thing as accuracy. But before she could speak, Dr. Rise opened the archival sleeve containing the logbook's first verified page. "There is more," he said. He placed the page under the camera, followed by the Polaroid of Daniel Cole beside the truck. The handwriting sequence, route dates, badge format, and support designation match Silverline racing records from 1978 through 1982. This document includes the name Daniel Cole. Support mechanic, rear compartment inventory. Ethan felt Lily's hand find his. Dr. Ries lifted one signed pit document, careful under the lights. "For more than 20 years our museum has searched for the missing Silverline support archive. Without it, several race entries, crew assignments, and vehicle movements remained disputed. This truck appears to have carried that archive, disguised inside a retired fire service body. This is not scrap." He looked around the room, then said the line so plainly nobody could turn it into theater. "This is the missing support record." The room went completely silent. Not because the truck had become beautiful, because everyone had finally understood that their first judgment had been ugly. Vanessa's face did not collapse all at once. It hardened, then paled, then settled into the expression of a person calculating damage. Caleb Ward stepped away from her side. "I am withdrawing from the Holt Heritage Partnership discussions," he said quietly. But the microphone near the podium caught enough of it. "I have no interest in building a collector program around a company that makes nonsense until it becomes profitable." One of Holt's board members asked Vanessa for a private conversation. Another asked Nora for copies of the sale file. The employees who had laughed now looked at the floor, except Roy, who gave Ethan a small nod that felt more sincere than any applause. Dr. Reyes made the museum offer in a side room, not on the stage. He explained it carefully. Great Plains Racing Museum wanted a 7-year display agreement, digital archive rights, conservation support, and Ethan as a paid documentation consultant. The package totaled $275,000 across display rights, archive access, conservation funds, and consulting. "We are not buying a shiny fire truck," Rise said. "We are preserving the proof it carried." Ethan listened without moving. Money could fix the late rent. Money could replace the cracked windshield in his pickup. Pay medical bills still lingering from Mara's last year. Give Lily a bedroom without a space heater in winter. But the number was not the part that made him look up. "The plaque," he said. "My father's name stays on it." Rise nodded as if he had expected that. "Prepared by Daniel Cole, support mechanic. Identified and preserved by Ethan Cole." Lily, sitting beside Ethan, whispered, "And the truck?" Ethan looked at her. "The truck gets its name back." Vanessa entered before the papers were signed. Now, without her attorney for a moment, she seemed ready to say something human. Instead, she said, "Ethan, this could still be good for everyone, if Holt is included." Ethan looked at the woman who had mocked him in front of his child, threatened his job, and tried to bend paperwork around her embarrassment. "Holt was included," he said. "You just didn't like your part." By Monday, the correction was public. Holt Premier issued a statement acknowledging that Ethan Cole had legally purchased the truck, that his discovery led to a museum authentication process, and that the company regretted remarks made during the clearance event. It was not as honest as Ethan would have written it. But it was more than Vanessa wanted. The board removed her from the Heritage Partnership Division and placed all surplus sales under third-party review. Caleb Ward signed with the museum directly, not Holt. Nora kept her job because too many people now knew she had protected the records. Grant Morrow stopped by Ethan's house with traffic cones for the driveway and said, "Figured your witness deserves a better perimeter." The fire truck left for the museum 2 weeks later, not restored, not disguised as something perfect. Conservators cleaned the glass, stabilized the rust, protected the documents, and left the broken hose reel in place, because Dr. Rise said the insult had become part of the artifact's public story. On opening day, Lily wore Daniel's old blue racing cap and stood so close to the plaque her breath fogged the glass. Visitors walked around the old red Ford C750 slowly, reading about Silverline racing. The missing support archive, the disguised fire service body, and the father and son, whose names had almost disappeared inside a compartment no one respected enough to open. Lily read the plaque twice. "Prepared by Daniel Cole," she said. Then her finger moved lower. "Identified and preserved by Ethan Cole." She looked up at her father. "Dad, did they finally see it?" Ethan watched a boy about Lily's age point at the broken hose while his grandfather read the logbook display aloud. He thought of Mara then, only once, because grief had learned to visit without taking over the room. Don't teach Lily to be loud, teach her to stand straight. Ethan put his hand on Lily's shoulder, the same way he had in the salvage yard, when everyone was laughing. "No, sweetheart," he said. They finally looked. Later, after the speeches were over, Dr. Rise let Ethan and Lily stand beside the truck before the museum opened the doors to the public again. The old blue cap rested for a moment on the display case beside the copied logbook page. Its faded fabric reflected in the glass. Ethan did not feel like a man who had beaten Vanessa. That would have been too small for what the truck had given back. He felt like a man who had carried a name across a gap and set it down where strangers could read it. Lily leaned against him, no longer asking whether Grandpa had worked on trash. The answer stood in front of her, rusted and imperfect under museum lights, proving that some things are not worthless just because powerful people say so. Some things are only waiting for the right person to open the compartment.